get my glasses, or I won't be able to see. Okay, hi everybody. We're going to get started. We've got a jam-packed afternoon for y'all. If you could please turn off your cell phones, because we do not want any kind of distractions during this program. You are truly in for a treat this afternoon. So Rooted in Bexley is a collaborative effort among the Bexley Community Gardens, the Bexley Bloomers at Jeffrey Mansion, the Heritage Gardens at the Ohio Governor's Residence, and the Bexley Arboretum and the Bexley Tree and Public Gardens Commission. So we are so grateful for all of your support this year. We hope you've enjoyed the last two programs we presented. And today is our piece de resistance? I don't know. Something, I mean, it's just going to be amazing. So I'm just so glad all of you could join us. And to all of you online, welcome. Let's see, I want to just do a quick shout out to my Master Gardener buddies here, Stephanie and Karen, and I appreciate your support. And Cindy, of course, for my marketing materials, and Susan Quintens, my chief cheerleader. So thank you so much. And I just want to make a couple quick announcements. There's going to be a program here on April the 10th. Award-winning author and pollinator conservationist Heather Holm, who many of you are probably familiar with, will be here on April 10th talking about pollinators, of course. And that program is being sponsored by Love Your Alley, which is yet another Bexley grassroots effort. Rebecca Ness, I don't know if she's here. Oh, there she is. So grateful for your programming. And on April 23rd, we will be celebrating all things trees here in Bexley, which we do all month, because Bexley, if you're not aware, is an arboretum, the first municipality to become accredited by Morton. So needless to say, we're pretty proud of that. So on April 23rd, we're excited to bring in another New York Times bestselling author, Amy Stewart. She'll be talking about her latest book, The Tree Collectors, Tales of Arboreal Obsession. That will be at 1 o'clock here in the auditorium. And that evening, we're hosting a fundraiser to benefit the Bexley Community Author Series Fund at the Bexley Community Foundation. That's going to be held in a private home in North Bexley, and it's a stunning property. David Hography and Brian Kemp have generously opened up their home for this fundraising event that's going to take place there. And Amy will be joining us, and we will be mixing some cocktails from her other book, The Drunken Botanist, if you're familiar with that. It's all about herbal concoctions, so it's really going to be fun, and I hope many of you can join us for a great evening. So at this time, I'm going to director of the library here, since it's 100th, well, we're celebrating 101 years now, and Ben is here to make a special announcement.
Excellent. Thank you. Oh, I just gave it away. Good afternoon, everybody. First, a very heartfelt thank you to Mary for that kind introduction. I joke with her that we love our gardeners here at the library. Never do just two of you show up. And so a dark alley and gardeners I don't want to come across. So thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure. I want to just show my love. I have my flower socks on. So I am ready for this exciting announcement. Today, when the gardeners are in the library, it's always a special day, and today even more so, because I'm beyond excited to share with you a monumental moment for the Bexley Public Library. We are proud to announce the unveiling of a remarkable new addition to our library collection, the Hope Taft Heritage Garden Library. This new library is dedicated to preserving and sharing the invaluable knowledge and wisdom that Hope Taft has generally shared with us. As many of you know, Hope Taft served as First Lady of Ohio from 1999 to 2007, and during her tenure, she demonstrated remarkable vision and commitment to the natural world. Her greatest legacy in this realm is the creation of the Heritage Garden at the Ohio Governor's Residence here in Bexley. This stunning garden is not only a testament to Ohio's diverse and beautiful native plant species, but also a reflection of her deep passion for the environment and her tireless efforts to preserve the natural beauty of our state for future generations. The Hope Taft Heritage Garden Library is a special collection of over 200 books generously donated by Mrs. Taft herself. And I want to show you what it looks like on the book spine of every book. Right here is a trillium, which, as you know, is native to Ohio. And I learned last week, not a green thumb. These books played a significant role in shaping her deep understanding of gardening, environmental stewardship, and the importance of cultivating a connection to nature. This collection includes a variety of volumes that were personally acquired, gifted, and passed down through the Taft family. It is a treasure trove of knowledge that spans generations and provides a unique window into the world of gardening, conservation, and environmental care. These are all available to be checked out after the program. There's also some upstairs in where they're going to live, a specially designated area in our book stacks afterwards, so you can go check that out. And through this establishment of the Hope Taft Heritage Garden Library, we aim to honor and extend Mrs. Taft's legacy. This library will serve as an invaluable resource for the Bexley community, garden enthusiasts, environmental advocates, and anyone who seeks to deepen their appreciation for the beauty and fragility of the natural world. It's our hope that the library will inspire a greater understanding of our environment and a lifelong love of learning and stewardship. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce a wonderful partner to the library whose vision and commitment and passion for the nature continues to inspire us all. Please join me in welcoming the former First Lady of Ohio, the incredible Hope Taft.
Thank you so much. Hopefully someone will share those pictures with me because this is a very special day. And thank you, Ben, for making me feel very special and for those very kind remarks. And I've been told that you can't hear me unless I do this. So if I get carried away, please remind me. But I do want to thank Ben for those kind remarks and for helping me continue to spread the word that I've become so passionate about in the last quarter century. It's hard to believe, isn't it? But you have really made my day. And for a dyslexic person who doesn't like to read, having over 200 books about something means it's really important to me. And so I hope it will be important to you too. But it's amazing to me that how things have changed in the last 25 years. And yes, the Heritage Garden is 25 years old this year. But I am also 80, and when you reach that age, you begin to realize that you won't live forever. And so I was thrilled when the Bexley Library wanted to make it easy for me to find a permanent place for the books that I love and to make a home for them where they will continue to frame the thoughts of several generations to come. When we started creating the Heritage Garden, I was just as green as most new gardeners, and I'm sure Guy Denny will tell you that. I knew I liked spring ephemerals, but not much else, and those were all the wildflowers that I knew at the time. I was blessed to have wonderful mentors to lead me in the right directions and to teach me through experiential learning and giving me good books to read, and some of them are here. And many of those books are in this collection, and many of those people are here with us today. As I think about the books that will now be on a shelf, I can see the progression of someone eager to learn but very naive to but also wanting to learn more and to become knowledgeable about the environment and about conservation. You can follow my path or create your own by walking to the back of the main room upstairs past the checkout desk, and you can find a comfortable chair there and pull a title off the shelf and start to read. I want to thank you all for encouraging the next generation to protect the environment that we live in. And I want to thank all the people, many of whom are here today, who have been patient with me and taking me under their wings so that I could fly and use my new knowledge to inspire others to plant natives too. We learned a lot along the way, how native gardens, native plants adopt or don't adopt to residential settings. I learned a lot about the beauty and the wide variety and the special and often rare botany of Ohio, and how an area how this area has been a crossroads of people and plants for eons. I have learned that no matter what your age or position, there is still a lot to learn, and I hope the Bexley Library will let me continue to add books like this one that you will hear more about. And I'll hold it up so Zoe, you can get a picture of it. She's autographed it, and it's going to be part of this new collection, and I am so happy. But I'm sure she is here today because the volunteers at the Heritage Garden heard so much about the light eaters last spring. And I can see Mary Mott nodding her head. Even though we have come a long way in the past 25 years, it's still too easy to find people who don't realize that we survive because the earth is kind enough to keep offering us free gifts that we tend to take it granted for or abuse. So I hope you will continue to work to change the perception of native plants and the insects who pollinate them, and work for an environment that will support us with food for our bodies and our souls. Please do something special during April, Ohio Native Plant Month. I mean, we can now share seeds, thanks to all of you, in a friendly manner. And so you can give your neighbors some of your native seeds to plant in their yards. And we can keep protecting the environment and keeping it uppermost in our minds in all our decisions. And we can get involved in making a difference in our local communities, in fact, our local yards, our local communities, our local state, and our local nation. It's really, really important that we nurture what we have so it doesn't disappear forever. That way, this connection will reach the dreams that we all have for it and continue to foster a love for learning and nature and preservation for years to come. I want to end with a quote, if I can find it here. Yeah. Harrison Ford, the actor, once said, "Nature doesn't need people. People need nature to survive and thrive." So I want to thank you all for being here, for learning more about nature and how we can help it survive and thrive so that we can do the same. Thank you very much, and please use this library.
Does everybody remember back in the early 80s, the television commercial, when E.F. Hutton speaks? When Hope speaks. So I'm glad we listened, because having spent a few hours with her already today, I'm telling you, you're in for a real treat. I don't even need to tell you about Zoë. I know you all know, or you wouldn't be here. But she's an incredible writer, and her book, The Light Eaters, was just fascinating, and that's the reason it was a New York Times bestseller. But I do need to say a huge, huge thank you to two very special friends who are involved with the Bexley Community Foundation that made today possible. The generosity of the foundation is why we're all sitting here today, and I truly appreciate their guidance and support in helping me to secure such great speakers for all of you. So without further ado, Zoë Schlanger.
Okay. Wow. It's so good to be here on such a momentous day. Congratulations to all of you for this new collection. I'm going to take 1 second to put my stuff down. I'll be with you shortly. Hi, let's see, is the next slide? Nope, we'll start here. It's truly such an honor to be here. Thank you so much to the Bexley Community Foundation, to Rooted in Bexley for bringing me here, and to the Bexley Library. Libraries are my favorite places besides the woods, so it's really an honor to be here. I also just came from going to the high school. You have some of the brightest high schoolers I've ever met at the Bexley High School. They asked me such incredible questions. They're engaged about nature, and no doubt that's because of many of you sitting in this room. I also feel very aware that I'm surrounded by plant people who probably could give this presentation for me. So I can't wait to hear at the end what I should have said or what I forgot. But my book is called The Light Eaters, and in it I talk about a hidden world that frames all our lives, as you know too well. And it's up to much more than you may think. Plants are up to much more than you may think, and that might be an unsettling idea, or it should be, given the fact that they outnumber us by sheer living mass by a factor of 8,000 to 1. So we are so thoroughly outnumbered by creatures we hardly understand at all, despite hundreds of years of botanizing. In fact, scientists are just now realizing there's so much they themselves don't know about the plants they study, and haven't found out until very recently in some cases. But to start, I want to take us all the way back to the ancient world of the 1970s, when a scientist named David Rhodes discovered something very strange happening in a forest near where he worked at the University of Washington, where he studied insects. For years, there was this blight of tent-forming, web-forming tent caterpillars, absolutely decimating this forest. They were defoliating the Sitka willows and the red alders, which you see here, and the trees were succumbing by the hundreds. Now, of course, when a tree is being defoliated, having its leaves eaten, it's effectively the same thing as that tree being visited by a famine. A tree without leaves to eat light starves to death. But then suddenly, after about 2 seasons of this, the tide started to turn. The caterpillars began to die, and the trees bounced back. And, you know, Rhodes understood what all ecologists know, which is that nothing happens in an ecosystem without a reason. Nothing is pure chance. So what happened to these caterpillars? The reason he found was that the trees effectively starved the caterpillars to death. The trees had changed the chemistry of their leaves to become less nutritious, so over the course of a season, they were robbed of all nutrients and themselves died. But what was even more bewildering than that spontaneous reaction by these trees was the fact that trees that had not yet been touched by the caterpillars also seem to have changed the chemistry of their leaves, sometimes a mile or 2 miles from where the infestation was occurring. It was as if they had received advanced warning, like they'd heard there was a plague afoot and had prepared for it. Rhodes published his findings in 1983, suggesting that the trees must be signaling to one another through some kind of airborne gas. And this paper would eventually change the direction of botany forever, but in a very cruel twist, it also would end his career, because in 1983, no one believed him. Of course, now we know that plants communicate. This is a basic fact of botanical sciences. In the years since Rhodes's paper came out, researchers have not only found that plants can emit these chemical airborne substances to warn each other of impending attack, but they can signal differently with their kin, their genetic relations, their siblings, than they can with stranger plants, and they can do this seemingly at will. I'm using air quotes with one finger, so hold those air quotes in your mind. But they can have separate codes to communicate with broader communities of several species when the situation warrants it, and just with their closest family members when it doesn't. We also now know that so far it's been found in sagebrush and goldenrod, but we now know that plants can have regional dialects of these chemical compounds, that a community of plants isolated on a hillside or in a valley or in a single field can over time develop regional variations of more universal chemical signals. And of course, geographic isolation is how our own regional dialects also develop. And plants' capacity to synthesize these complex chemicals spontaneously in their bodies, to deploy them out as needed, counts as an entirely additional sense, one that we scarcely have, at least not by our own will, at all. But I told this story about Rhodes to remind us of something. Science is an extremely conservative institution for very good reason. Scientists understand their immense responsibility to write a good first draft of knowledge, to be a backstop against quackery in their field, to have tremendous skepticism for any new big idea. But that also means that scientists tend to be resistant to scientific discovery. And this is a known and studied phenomenon. So truly new ideas take a long time to pierce that veil of skepticism and be adopted as mainstream science. For Rhodes, that meant he died believing his life's work was incorrect. He was met with a lot of criticism initially and chose to try to replicate his research as any good scientist would. And he conducted his follow-up study in the fall. His original study was done in the spring. What wasn't known at the time was that in addition to the many seasonal changes plants go through, they also change their communication according to different seasons. There's far less communication happening in the fall than the spring. So he wasn't wrong. There were just more variables hidden from his view. And nature is like that, right? Nature is not a window, it's a prism. And wherever we look, we find new refractions. And I tell this story to also remind us that in any moment in time, science is just a snapshot of what that discipline believes. It can change its mind dramatically. Plants can communicate, for example. And I do believe it's in a moment of this wholesale mind changing about plants as a whole. So I want to acquaint you with a revolution going on, very quietly, as academic revolutions sometimes do, in the world of research botany. Scientists are discovering that plants can do remarkable things, and the more they uncover about what plants can do, their complex forms and behaviors, it seems that the basic assumptions about plant life cease to apply, and we have to come up with new ones. And these findings are also provoking new questions, like, are plants intelligent? Could they possibly be considered conscious? And how would we ever even begin to think of something as conscious or intelligent if it doesn't even have a brain? So I'm going to introduce you to some of the remarkable feats scientists are discovering that plants can do. And then we'll talk about what it means to find these capacities in creatures that have no brains whatsoever. And then we'll think about why this whole idea is even so surprising to us in the first place. How did we come to decide that plants weren't these dynamic, sensing, active, alert beings? And then we'll also think about what might happen if we admitted plants into the realm of creatures we believe are intelligent in our own minds. But to start, it's very important to understand that there is no scientific definition for the word intelligence or the word conscious. Incredibly, there's no scientific definition for words like death or life either. It depends on what species you're looking at and what sort of model system. Consciousness, though, is the mushiest word of all. We do not know the mechanical substrates for consciousness in our own bodies, let alone anything else. We know that anesthetics can knock us unconscious, but we don't know how they work, which I find terrifying. But we do know that anesthetics also work on plants. So this is a video of pea seedlings under normal conditions. Time lapse, you have the minutes on the top left corner, so it's over about 25 minutes. They're moving that much. Quite active, of course, slower than we tend to notice. But when you put them under a bell jar and suffuse that bell jar with diethyl ether, which was used as an anesthetic in human surgery for decades, they will curl their tendrils inward and cease moving almost entirely. They'll eventually bend over. Again, you have the minutes on the left-hand side. But when you remove the bell jar and let the diethyl ether disperse, they'll reanimate back to their normal movement within 15 minutes. So again, consciousness is a mystery even in us, yet we humans are very much in the business of deciding who has it and who doesn't. Last year, a collection of biologists and philosophers got together at New York University to put out a declaration ascribing the potential substrates of consciousness to fish and insects and crustaceans. And this was an update of an earlier declaration made out of Cambridge in 2012 that did the same thing for mammals and birds. So we draw these lines in the sand, even if we don't always know what they mean. Some researchers say it's time to sort of extend this circle wider to include plants. So are plants intelligent? Are they conscious? And when would we know enough to tell? And that's the question to hold in your mind for the rest of this presentation. Perhaps it would be when we understood that they could plan for the future. Research in recent decades has shown that plants can record and store memories to access later. This plant is called Nasa poissoniana, and it grows high up in the Andes in Peru. In pretty harsh environments, a lot of wind, sometimes rain, very few pollinators, but it relies on pollination. And so each of these, you can see here, there's stamen laying down in these concave petals, and some are gathered in the middle. This is one of those rare plants you can see moving in real time or in human time. If you poke at the middle, like a bee's proboscis might, one of these little laying down stamens will eventually rise to vertical, have pollen at the end of them, to present to the next bee that might come along. Researchers found that when they played the role of a bee by poking it like that, this flower was able to record the time interval between pollinator visits and raise its stamen according to that schedule. And then when the researchers played around with being a little bit more chaotic bees and chose new time intervals, the plant would readjust within a day. So let's say one bee every 90 minutes became one bee every 45 minutes, 30 minutes. The plant would adjust its stamen raising schedule. And that's a great way to not lose its pollen to wind or rain. You only present it when you know it could be used by an insect. But like all memory in plants, and in some ways in humans, we know plants can record these memories, but we don't know where they're stored. Perhaps we would come to this intelligence conclusion if we understood that plants had clear social networks. We now do know that they have elaborate social lives, they have affinities, they have enemies. They behave very differently toward their kin in some cases than toward stranger plants. Rice plants, for example, will compete very aggressively below ground. They grow these long, noodly white roots to sort of dominate a patch of nutrient. But they won't do that if they're planted beside very closely related kin, so essentially siblings or half-siblings. In those cases, they will politely confine their roots and focus much more metabolic effort, much more energy on making fruit, rice. So some of these findings have obvious implications for agriculture. This is Asiatic broadleaf plantain, which is very closely related to the broadleaf plantain that is a weed in every field where I live, probably here too. And these are remarkable plants for many reasons. But the thing that blows my mind most is that these seeds of the broadleaf plantain, those little seeds in the corner there, can tell as a seed whether they're planted next to their genetic relations or not. To the extent that if two related broadleaf plantains are planted beside each other, just the seeds, and there's a third seed of an unrelated non-broadleaf species plant, everyone's still just a seed, the two broadleaf seeds, the plantain seeds, will germinate in sync in order to come up at the same time and have a better shot of shading out that third non-related seed plant. Perhaps we'd see them as intelligent if we knew that they could do basic math. This is a Venus flytrap. Wonderful plant for watching a plant move at the pace of an animal. Venus flytraps can count. They can do both subtraction and addition. You see the trigger hairs in the maw on the left-hand side, Venus flytrap, those little black hairs on the inside. Those have to be flicked a certain number of times within a certain amount of seconds in order for the trap to close, and then yet more times in a certain parameter of seconds for digestion to start. And that's because they don't want to waste digestion on a non-living thing. They want something that's wriggling, that truly will be a meal for them. So they don't want to digest a rock or a piece of, wood or something like that. If the movement stops and no more hairs are flicked in the requisite number of seconds, the trap will reset. It'll open, and it will effectively erase the memory of the counting. Maybe it would be useful to understand that they can assess their environment to make spontaneous decisions for their own flourishing. Tomato plants can defend themselves in some of the most elaborate, flamboyant, and gruesome ways of any plant, the humble tomato. One way they defend themselves is by encouraging caterpillars towards cannibalism. I'm told that these caterpillars have a tendency towards cannibalism anyway, when there's not enough food around. But tomatoes will change the chemistry of their leaves to encourage them to do that sooner. So they look up from eating the tomato plant and start to eat each other. But tomatoes also protect themselves in another way. They're able to manufacture compounds that summon the exact parasitic wasp that is needed to come parasitize caterpillars. So what happens is they're able to assess, based on the saliva and regurgitant left over by the caterpillar on the leaf, what species of caterpillar it is, or at least what species of wasp they need to come summon their predator to come do away with the caterpillars. And the wasp shows up, injects its eggs into the gelatinous caterpillar body, the larvae hatch and eat the caterpillar from the inside out, and then glue their little tic-tac-shaped cocoons to the outside of the caterpillar. And in this way, quite slowly and in a very campy fashion, I think, they proceed to try and save themselves, these tomatoes. And I've had people send me photos of this in their garden. I don't know if anyone else has seen this. I can't grow tomatoes, but I'm told it's not an unusual sight. Possibly the intelligence of plants would have more to do with their sensing abilities, their senses. Perhaps it helps to know that plants can, on some level, hear. Roots grow toward the sound of water running in sealed pipes, even if that sound is just a recording. They're moving towards the acoustic vibration produced by the water, not the moisture gradient if it's not available. This probably isn't news to a plumber. Root intrusion racks up huge maintenance bills in most cities. And then you have plants like the beach evening primrose, this lemon yellow teacup-shaped flower. And this plant was discovered, this is the paper at the bottom, 2019, to be able to increase the sweetness of its nectar by 3 times when exposed to the audio recording of bee flight, honeybee flight. Likewise, cress plants will boost their immune system when played the sound of their genuine predator chewing. It's a caterpillar, again. And when researchers toyed with that noise and used a leafhopper mating call vibration instead, which had the exact same amplitude and frequency, the plant did nothing. But this leafhopper noise had a slightly different rhythmicity. So essentially, this plant is listening for the exact rhythmicity of its genuine predator chewing. So plants like primroses and cress may be responding to sound, but that doesn't mean they hear in the way that we do. Again, no brain to translate this information. Sound to plants is pure vibration. And vibration is, of course, a physical stimulus. In fact, when researchers plucked a few of these petals off of the primrose to break this perfect bowl-like symmetry, it was no longer able to respond at all to the sound of honeybee flight. It seems that the flower is bowl-shaped for a very similar reason, potentially, that satellite dishes are concave. But when the researcher who made the primrose discovery, when I spoke to her, she said that when she sees a field of flowers now, she sees a field of ears. So you're about to see a lot of pictures of my hand because I got to go to a cold rainforest in southern Chile to meet this remarkable vine. This vine is called Bocchilla trifoliolata, and it was just recently discovered to be capable of mimicking any plant, or virtually any plant, we haven't found a limit yet, that it grows beside, without even making contact with that plant. They just have to be near it. It can alter its leaves' vein pattern, color, glossiness, matteness, thickness. I even saw an example of it developing a spike at the tip of its leaf to match a spike on a neighboring plant. And this is its standard non-mimicking shape. Here is it mimicking a maidenhair fern. And here's Bocchilla growing its leaves to quadruple or quintuple their standard size and making them darker and glossier to match another plant called Notro. And this one is my favorite because this is a baby Bocchilla on the left, trying its best and clearly failing to mimic a ranunculus on the right, that lacy one. That ranunculus was introduced to this forest in the last 2 decades, which rules out any potential long evolutionary relationship between Bocchilla and the plants that it's mimicking. It doesn't always do a particularly good job, but it's, I still think, thrilling to see it try. And people are calling Bocchilla a chameleon vine. Its capacity to do this appears to be useful for the same reason that chameleons use camouflage. It's a great defense. Bless you. When you're able to blend into your environment, you are statistically less likely to be eaten when some grazing animal comes along to get you, and it seems that's the case with Bocchilla. This has never been seen in any plant. There are plants that can mimic a single other species, and they have these long and tangled relationships, like mistletoe, which I always find funny that we use as a sort of romantic symbol when it's a parasitic plant. But those are long relationships with a single other species. Maybe that's why we call them, yeah. And so the fact that it's able to do this is provoking a really fun fight in botany over whether or not plants might have some visual capacity, might be able to, on some level, see. The argument goes that this must be visual information, especially if the plants are not touching each other in any way. There is also an alternative theory for how Bokila does this that involves microbial invasion and a sort of genomic hijacking, which I feel is even more alluring and bizarre, but more complex, so I'll leave that for when you read the book. We do know that plants have more photoreceptors on their leaves than we have in our eyes, more types of photoreceptors. And we know that they can tell whether they're being shaded by, let's say, a cloud or by a fellow plant, and whether or not that plant is related to them based on the gradient of light passing through the leaves. In theory, if you are bending over them, they can tell whether your shirt is red or blue. And this makes sense. They need to use light information so exquisitely well because they need to be able to get out of the shade of another plant. They need to be able to avoid too much sunlight or else risk being scorched. But both this potentially visually gifted vine and the hearing primrose bring up a very important caveat. Plants do not have brains. So we have not found a single central processing zone in a plant. But how then could information like light signals or acoustic vibrations be routed through a plant in a way that's useful to its entire body? This is at the center of the debate around plant intelligence. But more importantly, it's the central mystery of how plants do any of these things at all, how they do it without a brain. One theory of the case is that it makes sense that plants don't have brains because of their evolutionary heritage. They evolved rooted in place. We evolved to run across landscapes, to forage for our food. It made sense that we needed a compact central processing center that was very portable. And this is a picture of me with my compact portable central processing center, standing inside of a Moreton Bay fig at the National Tropical Botanical Garden on Kauai, which I really recommend. It's incredible. But plants evolved rooted in place, right? So they evolved to be very modular. They're made up of repeating identical parts that can be lost without great fuss. You can lop an arm off a plant and it will go on growing. Perhaps then it might be worth considering whether they evolved a more diffuse sort of whole body awareness that our human faculties just struggle to imagine. Each of the plant's limbs seem capable of alerting the whole body to any new stimulus or threat. It's made up of these disparate repeating parts that somehow are coordinated as a whole. So perhaps plant intelligence looks something more like network intelligence. And yet they also have systems that are strikingly similar to our own. And to illustrate that point, I want to tell you about a trip that I took to Wisconsin, to the lab of Simon Gilroy at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In the bleakest part of winter, it was -12 outside. There was snow on the ground. And I went to this lab of Simon Gilroy in order to pinch a mutant plant with tweezers in a dark microscope room. I wanted to read that little part from the book. Okay. Gilroy takes me into his lab, where Jessica Fernandez, a molecular biologist on his team, brings us a flat of young tobacco and Arabidopsis plants she'd reared herself, especially for my visit. They are each imbued with fluorescent jellyfish proteins that will make them glow. Sarah Swanson, the director of the department's microscopy center, joins us too. Swanson also happens to be married to Gilroy. Fernandez lightly drops the tray of plants on the lab bench, and a single leaf on one baby Arabidopsis plant catches the lip of a box, bending it in half. "Don't stimulate them," says Swanson, wanting to conserve all the plant's reactivity for the microscope. She'd found it was best to startle them from a completely resting state. "It's okay, we'll let them recover," Fernandez says. "And then we'll torture them," adds Swanson. Swanson leads us into a small room dominated by a microscope attached to a computer monitor. She turns out the lights. Fernandez dips her tweezers in a glutamate solution and hands them to me. Glutamate is the most important neurotransmitter in our own brains, and research had recently found that it plays a role in plant signaling too, boosting the signal. Be sure to cross the midrib, Fernandez says, pointing to the thick vein running down the middle of each tiny leaf. If I only pinch the edge of the leaf without bothering the big veins, the leaf will probably light up in response, but the signal won't travel to its other parts. The veins are the plant's information superhighway. Get the vein and the pulse will move all over the plant in a wave. I pinch it gingerly the first time, and I can feel the room's disappointment as we wait a few seconds in the dark for the image on the monitor to change. The leaf begins to light up, impressively to me, but I've seen Gilroy's videos, and I do know it gets better than this. I find it difficult to enthusiastically wound the plant, but Fernandez dips the tweezers and hands them to me again, this time with the instructions to really go at it. I feel like I'm in a vegetal version of the Milgram shock experiment. Unwilling to let this room full of scientists down, I pinch harder this time. The difference is dramatic. The plant lights up like a Christmas tree. The veins are blazing like a neon sign. The green luminance moves from the wound site outward across the rest of the plant in a bioluminescent ripple. I am watching this plant experience a cascade of feeling, a wave of sensation. As the light travels along the vein system, the image reminds me of something. It looks unmistakably like the branching pattern of the nervous system. Swanson whoops, "Oh, heck yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's deluxe." Gilroy hoots, "Save that one." Fernandez claps and saves the video to an archive. Within 2 minutes, distant parts of the plant have received the signal. Mammals use glutamate receptors to transmit signals quickly throughout their body, and it seems plants might too. The presence of neurotransmitters in plants brings up its own intriguing questions. If plants use neurotransmitters to send electrical signals, could they be said to have nervous systems? Before I can ask, Gilroy anticipates my question. Some of the molecular players might be the same, he says. The glutamate receptors in plants look like the glutamate receptors in animals. But he says it's not nervous conduction. There are no plant nerves. They just don't exist in plants. Still, he concedes that the systems themselves look a lot alike. This total lack of plant nerves didn't stop 2 scientific reviewers writing in a journal that Gilroy and Toyota had found nervous system-like signaling in plants. The issue had even leaked out of plant sciences of late. In a paper titled "Broadening the Definition of a Nervous System to Better Understand the Evolution of Plants and Animals," neuroscientist Rodolfo Linas basically argues that it makes no sense to define a nervous system as something only animals can have, rather than defining it as a physiological system that could be present in other organisms in different forms. So defining it phylogenetically, meaning assigning it to only one portion of the tree of life, ignores the very real force of convergent evolution, where organisms separately evolved similar systems to deal with similar challenges. It happens all the time in evolution. A classic example is wings. Flight evolved separately in birds, bats, and insects to very similar effect. Eyes are another example. The eye lens has evolved separately several times. It's reasonable to imagine the nervous system as another effect of convergent evolution. If a variety of nervous systems do indeed exist in nature, then what plants have is clearly one. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. Why not call that a nervous system already? So I wanted to show you what I saw in this lab. This is what it looked like when we pinched the plant. Sped up, again, seconds on the top left. This is lightning fast for anything we think plants do. And it really brings up questions about plants as electrical beings. We know they have action potentials. They react electrically to most things. This is what it looked like when Gilroy put a caterpillar on a leaf, a much more ecologically relevant example. So I realized that up until that moment in Gilroy's lab, I had been struggling to connect everything I'd been learning for the last year and a half or so about plants to the actual plants in front of me. The theory and the physical reality felt very far apart. I couldn't, it felt like it was literally incredible. I couldn't credit it to anything I could really see. It felt like radio waves or magnetic poles. I could accept their existence, but I couldn't internalize their materiality. But watching this green light move through the plant body changed that for me. Suddenly it all became very tangible. I was watching the plant becoming aware in its own way of my touch. This experience in Gilroy's lab also made me wonder, what if the whole plant could be considered something like a brain? And I mulled that over a while and eventually worked up the courage to ask it of a real botanist, someone who studies the way that plants expand their leaves as they grow. Her name is Elizabeth van Valkenburg. She has her own part in this book. And I'd saved this question until the very last moment of our interview in case she was entirely put off by it and ended our talk right there. And I asked it very sheepishly, could the whole plant be something like a brain? And then I watched her smile, thinking I'd made a total fool of myself. And she leaned in a little and then dropped her voice to this comedic whisper, and she was like, I think you're right. I just don't talk about it. So I want to be clear, everything I'm describing here is at the burning core of a debate going on among botanists, which means this whole realm of inquiry is incredibly unsettled. The things we're learning about plant behavior are good, sound, peer-reviewed science. Every piece of research in this book has been peer-reviewed. But botanists are fighting about what these findings mean. At one point a couple of years ago, there was a lot of academic venom being slung about the question of plant intelligence between those who'd like to start using words like intelligence for plants and those who think it's preposterous, because quite understandably, they don't want to start draping human notions of intelligence on a whole other taxa of life. Of course, we use the term and the concept of intelligence to separate humans from other humans. Why would we do that to poor plants? But I think that in a decade or two, we'll have arrived at a completely new stage in our conception of plants that transcends all this squabbling over language. And I think by then, these current anxieties will seem quite quaint. But it's also useful to remember that science can dramatically change its mind. I'm sorry if this next slide is upsetting to anyone. It wasn't so long ago thought totally preposterous that animals like dogs could do something as basic as experience pain. Up until the end of the 19th century, there were still live surgery demonstrations happening on unanesthetized dogs because feeling was thought to be only the domain of humans. We can credit a lot of early American surgery to this. But vivisection, these live dissections, ultimately came to an end, not because science changed its mind about it, even though it eventually did, but because groups of people got together and formed a social movement in which they protested this. They decided it was wrong and protested it, and that's what ended it. So sometimes it's not science that has to change its mind, but society. In many ways, ideas like intelligence and consciousness are much more suited to the realms of ethics and philosophy than they are to science itself. So perhaps it's us who might need to change our minds on the matter. But deciding that plants are intelligent or even conscious could have major implications for all of us. Once you think of a thing that way, it transforms from an object to a subject in your mind. And by doing that, you admit it into the realm of your ethical regard. It becomes very hard to disregard something you feel that way about. I know for me, everything I've learned about plants has changed my life dramatically. It's granted me this enormous sense of awe. I'm now totally in awe of plants, and we all know that awe leads directly away from exploitation. It leads towards respect. It's also completely re-enchanted my life in ways I didn't expect. I live in Brooklyn near a large park, and when I walk through that park now, I feel exquisitely aware of the plant dramas happening all around me. Where I might have seen a sort of wash of green, I now see thousands of individuals with their own lifestyles and proclivities and likes and dislikes, and they're all pursuing their own flourishing. So I want to leave you with a reminder, setting aside all of the fantastic new things we're learning about plants. They do one thing I still think is the most fantastic of all. They eat light. The title of this book comes from a quote from the late ethnobotanist Timothy Plowman, who he thought this whole squabbling over intelligence was ridiculous. He'd had enough of it. And he said, "They eat light. Isn't that enough?" And it should be. Of course, without photosynthesis, our ancestors could never have stepped onto the evolutionary treadmill at all. We would never have had a chance to evolve. When plants first climbed out of the ocean about 500 million years ago, they were the only thing on land capable of rearranging carbon dioxide and light energy and water into oxygen. Only plants could unlock this oxygen by tearing apart the carbon and the hydrogen and rearranging them. And how they do this after photosynthesis is complete, they release the oxygen through these little fish lip-shaped pores on their leaves called stomata, and this is what they look like under the microscope. But by incessantly breathing out, these legions of early land plants tipped the balance of gases towards oxygenation. They arrived to a totally inhospitable atmosphere of mostly hydrogen and carbon dioxide and oxygenated it. It's not a stretch to say they birthed the habitable world. So plants suffuse the air with the oxygen that we breathe, but they also quite literally build our bodies with the sugar that they spin through the same process. A leaf is the only thing in our terrestrial environment that can manufacture sugar out of non-living material, so light, water, air, things that have never been alive. The rest of us are just recycling that sugar endlessly, no matter what we're eating. Glucose, a plant sugar, is also the result of photosynthesis, and so plants use that to build their own bodies, and we build our own bodies by eating them. Our muscles and our bones carry the signature of those exact plant molecules, and without a constant supply of plant sugar, we would immediately wither. Our brains, in particular, run chiefly on glucose. So in that way, every thought that has ever passed through your mind is sponsored in some way by plants. You thinking about plants right now is made possible by plants, which this, of course, quite subverts a hierarchy that some of us were raised with, the sort of European Western thought tradition that can be traced all the way back to the dawn of rationalism, to Aristotle and his ladder of life, scala naturae, which placed man at the top and plants somewhere at the bottom, maybe below lower animals, but above rocks. At some point, the scala naturae became Christianized, and so this is a version with God at the top, and then angels, and then man, and then these very cute little trees all the way at the bottom. In all of these versions, plants are passive instruments, not sort of active creatures in their own right. But of course, indigenous science from all over has known for a long time something else, that plants are the primary organisms and we are the secondary or even tertiary ones. When reporting this book, I also read another text called Plants Have So Much to Give Us, All We Have to Do Is Ask, which is a collection of traditional Anishinaabe teachings, in which Mary Sisipchinius tells us that from the perspective of her Great Lakes area tribe, plants are the world's second brothers, created just after the elder brother forces of wind and rocks and rain. Plants are dependent on the elder brothers for their life and not dependent on anything created after them. So then non-human animals in this cosmology are third brothers. They're reliant both on the elements and on the second brother plants. Humanity then is the youngest brother, the most recently created of all these beings. Humans need all other brothers to survive without really giving much back in the other direction. Humans are not the lords of this earth, Genus writes. We are the babies of this family of ours. We are the weakest because we are the most dependent. I think this idea settles us back into our place in the world, which is a profoundly humble place. We are not some pinnacle on the evolutionary tree or the top of some ladder. Evolution is, in fact, not linear, and it's not hierarchical. We are each nodes on this entangled web, and we are just one example of this endlessly unfurling biological creativity. And each of us very linked by our total dependence. So perhaps ours is not the only way to be clever. Certainly our way of doing things is not the only way to be creatures with agency over our lives, a talent for planning for the future, or the capacity to make wise, spontaneous choices in an endlessly shifting world. So are plants intelligent? Are they conscious? Does it even matter? They literally give us our lives. I want to leave you with a quote from science historian Thomas Kuhn, who wrote that a scientific paradigm shift changes one's view of the world in which we live. Of course, the world itself stays the same, and plants will go on being plants, whatever we decide to think of them. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Deb. I'm
And I think
inviting
we can-
Deb Knapke up for
Cool.
a quick little presentation, if you will.
Sure.
Sorry, I was taking notes. Yeah, I definitely was taking notes. That almost made me cry
Oh.
because I've believed that for a very long time. And so anyone that understands plants and has worked with them, gardeners know that on a real basic level. But you put it into words beautifully. So we have a little gift, and you get to take them out.
Okay.
Because you talk about plants and you're flying, we had to figure out something that could go on a plane that didn't have soil. So first,
Oh, cool. No way.
yes. So this is Tillandsia bailey, which is an air plant.
No soil. Genius.
Yeah, no soil.
It's beautiful.
It's an epiphyte. And then there's a little card in there that tells how to take care of it.
This guy.
And that, yeah, is a resurrection fern.
These
Anyone
are
ever
so
do that
amazing.
with your kids? There are two species that I know of. One is Mexican and one is from Southeast US. This is the Mexican ones because we're not allowed to gather the Southeast US one. So anyways, no soil. And thank
so
you very
much.
much for a beautiful tribute to plants.
Thank you. This is so moving. Thank you very much.
Picture.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Where's who's taking the
Sorry.
I should have rethought this.
Thank you. I'm obsessed with ferns, and I love the resurrection fern and the air plant. I will not neglect. This is a beautiful air plant, but it's very special. Thank you.
Are you up for some questions?
I would love to take questions. Please, my
Okay,
favorite
all
part.
right. I'm coming. Gotta remember to use the mic.
So you are not inferring, I should say, that they have discovered the cell that emits emotions that they found in chimpanzees and whales and all, also in plants, or no? You were not inferring that.
There's a cell that emits emotions?
Yeah, they found it. There was a marvelous thing on NPR about a year ago, and we have that cell that emits our emotions, and so they have found it now
I
in
have to look
mammals,
this up.
and so I was wondering if you were inferring that with a plant.
I wasn't.
No.
I somehow missed that. That sounds absolutely
Yeah.
groundbreaking,
Yeah, it's
and I
really-
will look it up. No, nothing to suggest plants have emotions. Sort of depends how you see emotions.
Sure.
They certainly react very defensively when they don't like something.
Thank you.
But thank you. Or I think we're doing a mic situation for. I think there's a mic coming to you, so everyone can hear your good question.
sort of in the same vein, when you think plants think of being pruned?
It's funny, in my house, I have my partner do all the pruning, which is not, don't take my word for, that's not a rational thing, but I do know that they, you're alerting their immune system to an attack when you're pruning them, so they're building up their defenses in some way, which is not a bad thing. Of course, pruning keeps plants healthy, but I am aware that it's producing this flurry of defensiveness, and I don't like to do it to my plants. Someone does, though. I mean, this makes no sense, but of course, also stimulating them in that way can also prevent certain pathogens. There's many benefits to stimulating their immune system, but yeah, thank you. Hi.
Hi. Thank you, Zoe. What a beautiful book. And what I love about it is the way you inspire awe and wonder, which is an alternative way to get people to change their behavior. So I kind of want to talk about that. You talked about going to this because you were kind of depressed reporting on climate change a lot. And so what do you think, given that we can't really hope for much in terms of government to do anything, what can we as individuals do? Give us 2 or 3 things that we could do to help the natural world, the plants, and the broader system.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm back to climate reporting full time now, and it's just as bleak as ever. I think the first thing I tell everyone to do is vote, but you asked for non-political things. Write your Congress people, they do listen, their constituents. But apart from that, what you can do in your own community, which I know people in this room do, is put your land under a conservation easement, support a local land trust. It makes a huge difference. Land like that is in such short supply in this country, and we need all of it to be part of the conservation movement that we can. All of our little human actions individually feel small, which is why climate change as a concept is so depressing. But every single time you do something in that direction, you are choosing hope, which is an active thing that you have to cultivate in yourself always, because the alternative is just morally not allowed. Like, you cannot give up that idea. People talk about acting local. You all care about this amazing community. I know you do. And everything you can do here will make all of your lives better and the ecology around here better. And that counts for a lot, I think. Thanks.
Hi, fascinating, and we did buy a copy of your book. I do intend on reading it for more details. But I was struck by the language of intelligence and everything, and you talked about the Venus flytrap, being able to count. You talked about memory also early on. And I don't remember the plant that you talked about having a memory, but we could also talk in terms of long-term or short-term adaptation instead of having a memory. And memories normally associated with episodic memories, like when I habituate to something that's not a memory necessarily, it's an adaptation. So how do we avoid, I'm interested in when I find out in the book, whether you pose more of these as questions rather than as assertions. How do we avoid anthropomorphizing things unnecessarily?
Thank you for that question, and that's really at the heart of this entire debate, because plants are not little humans, and we should not mistake them for little humans. They've diverged from us evolutionarily so long ago. They have their own systems for doing things. But those systems sometimes look remarkably like our own. They may not use the same mechanisms. And questions of memory, you mentioned episodic memory, we know that we can habituate plants to things. And through one lens, that looks like a very rote sort of reflex adaptation. But of course, and this might sound like a cop-out, but you dip a toe into consciousness research in humans, and you realize there's a debate over free will and whether or not anything we do is truly an emergence of our consciousness and of our own active choosing, but rather some other sort of just as rote adaptation for ultimate survival and flourishing. So it kind of depends what lens you look at any of these through. I think for me, what I find the actions plants do that I find most tilted towards this kind of nebulous intelligence idea are the ones that are very spontaneous and that can adapt very quickly to situations that the plant has not yet encountered. And that's happening all the time. Examples of memory, the Bokila vine changing its shape to match something that was just introduced 12 years ago in that forest, or under 20 years ago, is that sort of spontaneous reassessing. And everything can just look like evolutionary adaptation. It's all good for them in some way. But so can almost anything we do. So it's a very living argument, and I pose all these things as a question because I don't presume to know. I'm not a scientist, and the scientists don't know. So we'll come to some new understanding about this, but you're totally right to be skeptical.
You have convinced us again that plants are unbearably awesome.
Yes, great.
And you have convinced us that they have a memory and that they react to what we consider to be pain. So I wonder if it is a shame to eat a carrot.
Well, you must continue to eat the carrot. We are animals that need to eat plants. We need that plant sugar. There's no way around it. And I think instead of worrying about whether or not we should, there is a sort of perceptual shift that could take place that might sound kooky, but bear with me, which is that if we all accept that we have to do some measure of violence towards every living thing in order for our own lives to perpetuate themselves, for us to live, that settles us even farther into this place of respect for the rest of the natural world. There are cultures that acknowledge. I spent some time living in the Pacific Northwest to report this book, and that's a place where a lot of the tribes in that area call themselves the salmon people. They have most of the fishing rights for salmon. They fish salmon, but they also revere salmon. And what would happen if, that's a culture where it's acknowledged that you have to take the life of something you deeply respect. So you should do it in the most sustainable way, the least cruel way, the way that best respects their right to continue to evolve and flourish. But you still have to do it because you're an animal. And so I like to think about that more than whether or not we should eat them at all.
And clean your plate.
Yeah, no food waste. Yeah.
Thank you, Zoe, for that wonderful talk. My question is about native plants and invasive plants and how that dichotomy continues, and are invasives always bad? Are native plants always good? It's a question I have.
That's a great question. Depends from our human perspective. So we've been in whatever ecosystem we're in for however long we've been here. And so the plants that we've been in the place with feel to us like the native plants, and they are exquisitely adapted to be here. But the other thing we've been doing for all of human history is moving plants around. So of course, most of these invasives are here because we put them here. And then they're decimating the ecosystems, the landscapes we love, that we see as native. Even though over the millions of years that plants have been here without us, those ecosystems have changed. So I think it's interesting. We use a lot of very nativist language to talk about invasives. They're foreign invaders. They're too strong. We use like these kind of supernatural, like they're so aggressive. And it's true, but they're actually just really good at being plants wherever they were put. In some ways, invasives are just experts. There's a chapter in this book about invasion biology in which I went to a lab at Wesleyan where there's a researcher studying plants as self-made monsters, where they are exquisitely good at passing on skills generation to generation. So some of the most invasive plants are just better at creating another generation that is slightly better adapted to wherever they've found themselves in. So their babies will be born able to tolerate drought or able to deal with a very specific soil situation. And generation over generation, and often invasive reproduce very fast, they become impossible to outcompete. So from plant biology perspective, incredible plants. Of course, from our perspective, that's not what we don't want to lose our ecosystems. So then it becomes a question of responsibility. We brought them here. It's probably our job to make sure they don't run rampant over whatever was here before. But it's tricky ethical territory. The researcher who studies this, I talked to her for a while. She lives in Connecticut. She has a backyard. She has made it possible for native varieties of flowers to come back in her own backyard that are not seen in that area, or haven't been seen in that area of Connecticut in a long time because it's very developed. And she's very proud of that. But she has a patch of the smartweed that she studies that she doesn't have the heart to tear out. She keeps it contained, and I asked her why, and she said, well, because I probably brought this back on my lab coat. It's like, I accidentally put this here, and I just make sure it doesn't spread. So this is all tied to human values at the end of the day. Thanks.
The Light Eaters was my book club's book this month.
That's so cool.
We discussed that on Monday, and the members of the book club know that I put in a huge flower garden every year, and that's a main part of who I am. And so after we discussed the book, one of them turned to me and said, so now what are you going to do differently because of what you learned in this book? And I went, duh, and I could not think of anything. So I decided to ask you.
Well, I mean, you're cultivating plants. What could be better than that? I don't have any notes. Is there anything you're concerned about? I'm sure you're doing all the most wonderful things. I'm not even a gardener. How would I possibly tell you what to do? I mean, aside from not using Roundup, I can't really imagine what to tell you. That's awesome. I'm very jealous of your beautiful flower garden.
Well, to answer your question on that one, I think I might be doing some bowing when I'm gardening now, just in reverence of the plants. But I do have a question about host plants and specialization. And so I'm thinking about the monarch butterfly and its relationship with milkweed. And if the milkweed is sending out any sort of distress signals to help bring predators in, or changing its leaves in any way for these relationships that have developed. I understand that monarchs aren't fantastic pollinators, so I don't know how much benefit they're bringing to milkweed. So I'm wondering why a milkweed plant would allow itself to be eaten by caterpillars.
That's a really fascinating question. So I don't know that much about monarchs. So they're not good pollinators?
As far as I know, maybe somebody else has different information.
That's fascinating. There must be some other advantage.
Okay.
I don't know, because normally I don't actually know the answer, but this makes me think about, thinking about many of these plants that do produce defenses for caterpillars eating them. There's this dance that takes place where they don't eradicate all the caterpillars, because in most cases they'd be eradicating, exactly what you said, their next generation of pollinators, which they need. So it's this very tight dance where everyone comes very close to obliteration, but doesn't, and somehow ensures each other's flourishing, even while one is a pest in one part of their life cycle and absolutely necessary for pollination on the other. But I don't know. That's a great question. Now I want to look it up. Thank you.
Sorry, Zoe. So let's have time for you to sign some books.
Oh, sure.
So Sue, do one more question.
What's your next book?
I have no idea. I'm really interested in interspecies collaboration as a driving factor in evolution. And there's a new recognition in environmental theory and evolutionary theory of the role that collaboration has played throughout time in speciation, where it's not all about competition. competition's important, but there may be this other factor that is very important and can be and inherited changes through generations according to their environment. But I don't know how to make that into a saleable book, so if anyone has an idea, please come tell me in the signing line, really. I'm not kidding. Thank you.
Okay, so I have a kind of a fun question. With the Venus flytrap, it's really cool, you know, that it can tell if there's movement within it. But have any of the insects adapted so that they play dead?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know.
That's kind of
you would think if the plant has figured out this, because there's other cases. There's this case of yellow monkey flower, which grows wild in like California. I don't know about where else. Has figured out how does it go? They emit a certain chemical when they are full of pollen, and bees have figured out that and will, sample the air. Maybe it's flies. Sample the air for that to figure out which plant to land on. But the monkey flowers learned how to lie. So instead of making the pollen, it just emits the chemical, which is a lot less energetically taxing. But then I think the next chapter in this saga is that the bees have also figured that out. So there's this like complicated lying dynamic between all of them. So I wouldn't be surprised. That's a fantastic question. And maybe there's some insect people in the room. I don't know. I think that's all the time for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zoe. I just want to make one little announcement.